Welcome to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, the place where research is meeting the real world. I'm Dr. Dion Stevens, your host, co-author of the Psychology of Black Womanhood book, and a professor of psychology. I'm so glad you're here, so let's dive into today's episode. In conversations about Black womanhood and social justice, some urgent issues still remain under-discussed. Among them, the epidemic of violence against Black transgender women. This is concerning given this community faces disproportionate rates of physical violence, discrimination, and systemic neglect. Understanding the roots of this violence involves delving deep into a complex web of societal factors, including entrenched racism, transphobia, and misogyny, which often manifests in harmful stereotypes and prejudice. Further, neglect from institutions that are supposed to serve and protect, like law enforcement and the healthcare systems, exacerbates their vulnerability. To explore these complex issues, we're talking with Pamela Hollowell, a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in working with transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals, unhoused and transitional aged youth, and active duty and retired military members. Ms. Hollowell earned her master's degree in counseling psychology from Argosy University and has served as the president of the San Diego Black LGBTQ Coalition. I'm so glad that you are taking the time because I know how busy you are. You're a therapist, you're an activist, you're doing research. There's so few people with your training and your background and understanding. I think, it's important to start out with some foundational information. A lot of people hear the word transgender women, but they're relying on this one-dimensional narrative. It would be useful if we can start with you breaking down what we're talking about when we're discussing transgender identities.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. So as we kind of talk about breaking down like this idea of what it means to be trans, I always like to start by a reminder. Whatever ethnicity that you are, you woke up as that ethnicity. You didn't choose that ethnicity. And honestly, you have a privilege of recognizing immediately, this is the ethnicity that I'm walking in the room with. I have an idea how other people will kind of perceive me based on this. But for a lot of trans, non-binary, NB, gender non-conforming folks, this is a difficult process because everything outwardly is saying that you're supposed to be this, but you have a strong internal sense within yourself that says, actually, that's not accurate. And it can be as young, as research says, as 2 or 3 years old before you're really taught what it means to be a boy, a girl. And oftentimes parents don't talk when you're 2 or 3 years old about any other gender identity that's in between. So a lot of times people talk about, what is this thing about being trans? Or what is this lifestyle? And so I try to let them know. It's not really a lifestyle. Right. It's just recognizing who you are. And I can understand to some extent why folks would consider it's a lifestyle if they're looking at certain choices that you might make as a trans, non-binary, NB person. They might take a look at how legally changing your name and your gender marker, socially transitioning, access to medically necessary gender-affirming care as choices. They are choices. They don't reflect a lifestyle. They reflect somebody wanting to have a healthier, more happier, longer life with wellness around them, because everybody wants to be happy. And so the choice really is recognizing, this is who I am and I'm ready to do something with that, versus the choice of, I don't quite know who I am, or I know that I'm not internally what other people externally see, but I'm not going to do anything about that, which is a choice as well to make too. People can make whatever choice. But I want people to really understand trans people are just like anybody else. We live and we breathe, we eat, we love, we bleed, we cry. It's all the same. And it's this internal sense of your identity being different than what your body, would want. And also quickly, I want to say that a number of people can find out from 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, hey, I'm not this gender that everyone is acting like I am. And it's funny because what children, with babies, they don't know this. They just naturally end up there, which is really like how you know there's something internal that's happening here. And it's not a disability. There's nothing wrong with that. But people can also, when they're hitting puberty, recognize, oh, my body is doing some things I don't like. I don't understand this, because we're just not taught the language, and we're not taught to ask ourselves these questions, especially if we're in Black and brown communities where these questions are very taboo, especially if we're connected to like religious institutions.
I really like how you talked about that getting gender affirming care, whether it's surgery or transitioning, is an act of wellness. It's not just a behavior. Can you expand on it? I think that's really important, because that's what we're hearing in the media today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can, speak a little bit, from my own experience. Growing up, I knew at a very young age that I identified as a girl, and it was something that my mom just could not understand. Black, single, amazing mom. She did everything right. And didn't have this knowledge, did not have this, experience. And going doctor, psychiatrist, I think about, like, since I was on Medi-Cal, like how many like tax dollars, if you will, some people like to talk about that, went to these services when in all actuality, what I needed at that time were like puberty blockers. I needed puberty blockers to just kind of slow down, so that then I had an opportunity to be like, okay, before my body just continues to do things on its own, I can slow that down. I can have a conversation with myself. I can talk to my mom. We can kind of figure out where it's going. Because without doing that, then the gender affirming care became, well, I need to have top surgery, I need to have bottom surgery, I need to have all these other things that perhaps I maybe wouldn't need to have had if I was able to have been on puberty blockers, to have stopped all of that. Like it's additional funding, additional money that then ends up getting spent on my health and wellness, but was necessary, because if I did not have access to gender affirming care, I would have died. Suicide was on my mind. I had already attempted. I was 13 years old. I would not be having this conversation with you today if at some point I was not given access to gender affirming care. So this is an act of wellness. It's medically necessary. Having access to gender affirming care allows trans and non-binary folks to be able to move about the world with a sense of safety, with a sense of being seen as they are. It lowers mental health outcomes, so that there's less of a need for therapy, though there's nothing wrong with therapy. But if you can take care of a problem without needing to then utilize additional resources, then why can't we take care of it? It's like your arm is broken. So naturally, what do? You go to a hospital to get it fixed. And so that's really as simple as gender affirming care is. It's not a contagion. They're not having it done in schools. It's not, done in back alley somewhere. It's gender affirming care. Just like if you had breast cancer, you would go to a doctor, you would have x-rays, you would have screenings, so that you're able to live and be whoever you want to be.
You touched on the issues of being Black. What are some of the unique challenges that Black transgender women experience at this intersection of race, gender identity, and even class?
Being at that intersection, you take on whatever racial discrimination, stigmas a typical Black or brown person would have. So if somebody doesn't like Black people or brown people, then you have that already on your hat. In addition, as a woman, the inequities that come in our society as living as a woman, not being respected, heard, having necessary body autonomy, especially nowadays where we've got so many men who want to decide how women should use their bodies and what they should do and what's okay and what's not okay. And then you also have this additional this stigma and discrimination of being part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so it all ends up working together. Class ends up working together. So now as a Black or brown trans woman, you have the issues of finding affordable housing. In many states, be discriminated against because you appear trans. Passing, which is taboo, and I don't really like talking about it, becomes your way of surviving. You have to be able, in many instances, to pass in order to avoid some of the discrimination, the stigma, in order for you to survive. It becomes your way of surviving. Also with access to healthcare, because there are healthcare providers that know nothing about working with trans and non-binary folks. They're not really adequately, educated in medical school about trans bodies. And so they can anticipate that all trans people have the same things, and that's not true. And then, of course, there's the role that income plays. If you find housing, if you find a good job, you could be at risk at that job, like starting with the interview process. What name do they go by? Do they go by the name that you're, asking them? If you're in a state where you can legally change your name, or if you're not in a state where you can't legally change your name, like how much of a pushback will you have to face? Then we also have relationships. And so coming out and like the fear of losing family, of partners, there's an increase in intimate partner violence. A lot of people wouldn't consider like a person that you're hooking up with an intimate partner. In my research, I am counting them as intimate partner because of the fact that the violence is occurring because that person, usually a cisgender man, wants some kind of sexual connection and either has that sexual connection, but then finds out, oh, you're trans, and then acts in some kind of fatal way, or is fine with the partner being trans, but doesn't want anyone else to know about it.
This was a perfect segue because one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is about your work and your research on this. So your paper that you have characterizing the prevalence and perpetrators of documented fatal violence against Black transgender women in the United States, you jump right in by saying it's an epidemic. Why are so many Black transgender women being victimized in this way?
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. I appreciate you asking. This was the first kind of study of its kind. We really tried to comb through the data from 2013 to 2021. It's important to note that the HRC Human Rights Campaign only started, compiling this data starting in 2015. And this data it's definitely underreported, and it's not always clear if somebody is Black or is trans or non-binary. But this is definitely happening for a number of reasons. One reason is there are many states that have something called the trans panic defense, where they make it okay in the court system to murder a trans woman under the guise that, oh my goodness, you're shocked. It's kind of like another defense that we know of, like lover's quarrel, where somebody then ends up killing somebody else because they're so surprised. Right. And it was in the heat of the moment. Secondly, it's significantly underreported. There are sheriffs, there are law enforcement that don't acknowledge that trans people do exist. So they underreport who is actually being hurt. Some of the women were murdered simply because they were walking down the street and a man found them attractive and the woman was not interested. And so there was a heckler. Somebody said, oh, that's a man, because that's still the framework. And then that led to that young woman being murdered. She's just going about her day doing what any other woman should be able to do, which is say no, and then ends up getting killed. So there's so much of this. There's shame, there's this stigma. There are a lot of heterosexual men that still are trying to understand their attraction. And I think that they might be okay with it, but then it becomes about society and society's standards. Society saying, especially now, that there's something wrong with trans people, that trans people are domestic terrors, that it's not allowed and it's not okay to raise the pride flag.
The other thing I found from your study that was interesting, almost 2/3 were actually romantic partners or sexual partners with these women. So these are men who knowingly chose to go into these relationships, which I think goes back to what you're talking about, is this idea about what is appropriate masculinity.
Yeah, it just goes back to this threat, because masculinity so far, it appears very fragile. I think a large part of that is because Black and brown men have to walk around with a facade because they experience trauma, and they've experienced trauma growing up in their own communities, their neighborhoods, their family structure. Black and brown men walk around with this facade for their own survival. And then there's this piece, like people just are not talking about what is sexuality, what is gender, sexual health. They're not feeling like as comfortable in talking to people and having these kind of honest conversations. And we talked about that in our newest study that we're doing that's funded by CFAR in our Kickstarter grant. We were talking to cisgender, mostly heterosexual Black and brown men about their relationship preferences, dating preferences, gender norms, masculinity, sexual health. And we're finding just from those folks, they're really not in communities with folks that really have this knowledge. They're not feeling comfortable talking to their doctor about it. They're not really talking to their friends about their relationships because they're afraid that somebody will look at them as if they're gay. Mm-hmm. And then they will have to defend themselves. Men are taught, if you do something to assault my character, I have to then use some kind of force to reassert my masculinity. And so that feels like that fragile balance of this masculinity where they have to hold it so tightly. But once it feels like it's potentially challenged, and it becomes challenged if somebody sees that you're dating a trans woman. Right. Because you might be okay with it, but then somebody else might have something to say. And then you also, as a man, are expected to speak up and to support her because she's your woman.
I know from your previous work, you're showing that of these women of color who are being murdered, it's 75% are by Black men. So this Black masculinity is so tied in. So how did that tie into this new study that you're doing and the work you're doing now?
We really wanted to take a look at why, that was. Mm-hmm. And a good part of it has to just do with the location. Mm-hmm. So many Black people still live in the South. And I think despite how maybe like it looks on social media, there's still more like intra-racial connections than interracial. I think another factor that we're kind of looking at is like, okay, what is specific when it comes to like this dynamic between Black cisgender men and Black trans women? And I mean, attraction is just attraction. I think that we're just finding each other attractive, but Black men really care a lot about having a legacy, having biological children. From the folks that we've interviewed so far, they're fine with hooking up with trans women. They have different thoughts about having a relationship.
How can Black communities then work to create safer, more affirming spaces for transgender Black women and their relationships?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important is ensuring that Black trans women are leading conversations about safety and inclusion and policy. I think that members of our Black community, like, we need to accept Black trans women exist. We are women, period. The acceptance and normalizing gender diversity. Like, I think that in Black communities, we have to promote more about gender identity and promote that in our education and our expression in schools. I think that we need to establish more Black trans affirming resources. We really have to be able to respond to harm with accountability. So I think that we have to be able to talk to like our families, talk to like our church leaders about understanding, like, if you're a person of faith, God is supposed to love all of us. God has created like all of us. So Black trans people need to be accepted into that fold and not seen as outcasts. It needs to be normalized, and the understanding of what's okay and what's not okay. From my framework, like, respectability politics causes folks to conform to this more dominant narratives that really only like are helpful for like white cisgender heterosexual people, because those are like the norms. These exclude Black trans women because we're viewed as like disrupting this traditional idea of what it means to be male, female, etc., and then ends up like labeling us as if we're confused or there's something wrong with us. But we have to challenge that. We have to challenge this anti-Black transphobia, and we have to challenge it within our families, our churches, our media. We have to uplift unapologetically Black trans visibility as allies. Like, I need folks to be able to step into a room that I'm not in and voice that this is not okay. This policy is not okay. This politics is not okay. we are still using pronouns in this workplace.
Yeah.
We still are standing with our Black trans siblings. We are still supporting LGBTQ like organizations. You don't have to be down with them. You just have to accept, okay, they exist. We exist. We're all good. Nobody's trying to convince the other person to join. There's no, reward for trying to like get other people to become trans and all that stuff,
Yeah,
you know?
Maybe it's me. I'm also seeing different shows coming out. Like we had Pose, we had Orange is the New Black, we also had P Valley. We're beginning to see representations that are not one dimensional. And they're showing them in leadership positions and having relationships and not just playing on the stereotype. Do you think that's making a change, or is it maybe because of what I'm happen to choose on my channel?
I think it's absolutely. I mean, that goes into why it's important to have, diversity in media and storytelling and just having it like in your life, because like once you're able to see it, it gives you a sense of hope, that you can belong, you can do these things. As we were talking a little bit before, like that's what motivated me to create my Grieving Still series. The first book in the Grieving Still series is called Grieving Still, Finding the Other Side. And one of the main characters is Prue, a Black trans woman who transitions. And at the very beginning of this story, it kind of goes through a little bit about her journey while she's also grieving her former self and welcoming this new like chapter of her life. Because although like you can be really excited about it, it's still also there can be these mixed feelings, especially as you start socially transitioning. And so it was important to me to create that character because there are not lots of Black trans characters that are in story, let alone fantasy fiction. And it means a lot that in fantasy fiction, we're able to create narratives that are outside of this heteronormative binary. We shouldn't still be forced to use like the same kind of characterization as a hero, as a protagonist. In fantasy, we can do whatever we want. And if you can see it, even if it's in a TV show, even if it's in comedy, if you can see this person's able to live their life, this person's able to walk on the streets, this person's able to be in a relationship. If you can see it, that gives you a sense of hope that you can be that too.
Now that we're talking about, though, I'm thinking all these shows are really geared towards Black audiences. What about the white community, particularly the LGBTQ AI community? How are they supporting or not supporting Black trans women, particularly around these issues around violence?
Oftentimes when we kind of think about the LGBTQ plus community, trans people are kind of like at the wayside. And I think that we've experienced that over the years when it's come to policy. There are certain bills that in people's mind would have gone through if we had left off like trans non-binary folks. But then we forget that it was trans non-binary folks that were at the forefront of Stonewall riots and that have been really outspoken, speaking out, that have led to like the LGBTQ plus rights that we've been able to appreciate up until this point. And we will continue because progress, you can't stop. Progress will roll through like a mighty river. I think when it comes to like support, LGBTQ organizations can continue to support trans folks by ensuring that they're speaking out on trans rights. They're speaking to politicians, both at the city level and at the state level. And it has to be these allies, these LGBTQIA2S plus allies. Because it's time for them to use their privilege, just like I'm asking non-LGBTQIA plus folks to use their privilege. Because once, one of us is attacked, we're all going to be attacked.
Yeah.
So even if it's not something that directly has to do with you at this moment, it will. It has to do with somebody that you love. It has to do with somebody that you care about. It will happen and it will affect you. And it's a slippery slope.
Given the current climate, it's got to be very scary for Black trans women. What kind of impact do you think it's having in terms of violence?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that violence is more, which, leads us to why we're doing our CFAR Kickstarter study. Because It's through education and it's through having intentional conversations with Black and Brown men that we can start to shape some of their narrative and shape it against the weapon that the government is trying to use against trans people. Society, which is led by the government, as far as I'm concerned,
Right.
is trying to dictate you need to be this way, you need to think this way, you need to have, these kind of ideas. If you don't have these ideas, then you're wrong. And that's going to lead to more violence. And I think it will also lead to more suicide attempts, which is unfortunate, especially for our youth, because one of the first things that, this administration did was trying to prevent and successfully preventing gender affirming care for folks under the age of 19.
Right.
And now parents have no idea how to support their youth, so they just get to watch their youth slowly decompensate with little resource that they can do legally.
You're one person doing that's really visible with this training, doing therapy. You've got to be reaching the burnout phase too.
Yeah, I got here because of the fact that I met, when I was working at a different organization in San Diego, I met a trans man who came into our place of work for an LGBTQ training. It was at that point, at like 23, 24, I met this man, Connor Maddox. I'll say his name because he's amazing. And it was seeing him that led me to realizing, well, I'm not a man, but he was able to do this. Maybe I can do this too. I remember crying once I emailed him and he walked me through what I could do, something that I didn't think was ever going to be possible. Mm-hmm. And it slow, but it started this trajectory. And so I figured if I could finally make it on this side, I wanted to do something to help support other people get on this side, because life is dangerous when you're without hope. Once you have no hope, the forces against you really have their way with you. And they need you to have no hope in order for their plan to win. As long as you have, even if it's a mustard seed of hope. And it's cute because that actually is the title of like the next book in the Breathing So series, Crossing Over the Garden of Hope. But once you have just a seed of hope, you can allow that to grow. And that can grow beyond your wildest imagination. Even when the sequoia trees are on fire, that fire releases seeds that allow them to grow again. And so this is very much, I think, the season that we're in, the season of rain, the season of fire. But we are not going to let that stand in our way of having the force, that quiet storm that allows us to continue. And we have to be able to continue to take care of ourselves.
Right.
What I have to do is check in with myself regularly, having a good wellness plan, having a good support system, recognizing when it feels like, okay, I need to take a break, because rest is a form of resistance. It's also a form of simply wellness. Right. Rest is how you take care of yourself. Rest is how you continue to be you. You're not going to be able to handle everything. This is something where multiple forces, communities, allies, states, organizations need to get together. And we can all do our little part, but this is something where we all need to get unified.
Thinking about a Black trans woman or a trans woman of color who's sitting here listening to this podcast, what would you want them to know, or what would you like to say to them right now, particularly as we're talking about this epidemic of violence?
I would say, speaking from one Black trans woman to another, you are valued, you are worthy, you are beautiful. It's what you're experiencing right now is an example of the issues that are part of our system. It's not a reflection of who you are. You are still amazing. There's nothing that's wrong with you. And it's important that you take care of yourself and that you filter out, to the extent that you can, all the unnecessary bull that is coming your direction. stay connected to the people that care about you, stay connected to the things that you care about, and don't be afraid to reach out for support. Support can be texting a warm line, it can be calling a hotline, it can be going to your nearest LGBTQ plus center, you can be talking to your parents or family member or chosen friend, it can be going to church, because there are Black, trans, spiritual people out there. But make sure that you are taking care of yourself and know that you are loved. And don't allow your hope to be dissolved by the inequities. You will far outlive them, and you will live to tell the story.
Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, where research is meeting the real world. We were just in conversation with Ms. Pamela Hollowell, a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in working with transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals. We're excited to dive into these conversations that bring together academic insights and real-life stories. With voices like Ms. Hollowell's, we're hoping you're finding meaningful takeaways to carry with you throughout your daily lives. Our community keeps growing, and that's all thanks to you. Your continued support, whether it's sharing the podcast with friends and family or spreading the word on social media, truly means the world to us. If you want to dive deeper into these topics, be sure to pick up a copy of our book, The Psychology of Black Womanhood. It's a perfect companion to the podcast and a powerful resource for learning and continuing these dialogues. Until next time, keep reflecting, keep learning, and keep honoring the lived experiences and research centering Black womanhood.